You are listening to the Jam Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is Mimi Chakarova, who is Emmy-nominated filmmaker, and she's also the founder and creative director for Still I Rise, which is just an amazing organization, and also Bite-Sized Films. Welcome to the show, Mimi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This is very interesting. You have a what you're doing is pretty amazing. So I do want to talk about Still I Rise, definitely, because that's kind of the foundation for everything that you're doing, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
So let's talk about how you started this and what generated the idea to begin Still I Rise, and also just so our listeners know, what is Still I Rise all about?
Still I Rise Films it's stilliririsefilms.org. It's an organization. Um, it's run by filmmakers, myself included, and I am the founder of this organization. I thought it would be, first of all, really important to create a platform for short films that deal with adversity and overcoming adversity and still rising, above the odds, and telling stories of ordinary people who often don't have a chance to tell those stories. They don't have, I remember when I was teaching at Berkeley, and I was on the admissions committee, we would get all of these applications from graduate students, and often they would say, I want to be a journalist or a filmmaker so I can give voice to the voiceless. And that always upset me, because I felt that it's not that people are voiceless, it's just that they don't have an outlet for that voice. People have been telling their stories all along. It's just that it's very difficult to get those stories in the right place, and get people to care and get people to change perceptions and behavior and so on. So I thought, I made a bunch of feature length films. And so I come from the long form tradition, and I thought, if my ultimate goal with the work that I do is to change perceptions, maybe it would make more sense to create short films, because, as you know, 85-minute or 90-minute documentary films take years of work. And I thought, compressing it to a 15 or 17 or 20-minute film will give me the ability to perhaps make 6 or 7 or 8 of them per year, and on different people and different subject matter and different struggles that people go through, um, and be able to offer more to the world. And at the same time, make sure that more of us women get to do the same, which is how the fellowship program got started as an idea, and is finally here and happening. So it's been pretty exciting.
It is very exciting. It is very exciting, and I love the concept of the bite-sized films. That they're, you, you're right. I mean, you complete the stories pretty much in whatever time period, because each film is a slightly different length. So you do complete the stories there. They were all pretty inspiring and amazing stories. And I want to know how you chose the different people that you decided to document.
It's a great question. I would say it's a combination of mostly serendipity, coming across people, friends and colleagues telling me you should talk to someone. I came across someone whose story is remarkable. You should talk to that person. Um, and then sometimes, in one case, feeling like I had done a project a while back in Los Angeles, in Skid Row, and I met some remarkable, it was on homeless veterans, homeless women veterans. And so I met some remarkable social workers along the way doing that project. So I knew when I started Still I Rise that I wanted to do a story on someone who was working as a social worker, because I have such respect for that profession and for people who choose that profession, because they're so underpaid and often underappreciated. So I was actually seeking someone. I actually did research to find someone who was working as a social worker, and that's the story in The Bullet. But yeah, I would say with every single film that we produced and put out there, the origins of how we found the individual varies, but a lot of it is serendipity. It's just identifying, having a short conversation with someone. For example, in The Snake, a young man I had known for years, but I didn't know his personal story until one day we were screening one of the feature films we had done. And he was there in the lobby of this theater, of this movie theater, and he came to me and he said, you should really hear what I have been through and, my own personal journey. And I said, look, I would love to. And it took another 2 years to sit down with him and record the story on camera. Yeah, I would say, it's amazing what the things that people hold inside and often don't share with the world because it's so deeply personal. But, from that comes the whole notion of personal stories truly matter because they break down all these boundaries of we think we're so different. We think and we're not. Like we all experience very similar obstacles in our lives, some to a lesser degree than others. So that has been the objective, is just to tell, and not to let geography, not to focus only in the place where I live or where I'm based, but to, you get on a plane, you fly to where you need to, and you tell those stories regardless of where the person is living. Just
That's
spend time
what,
with them.
yeah, that's what, I mean, it's so remarkable. That's why I love film. I mean, people, think, oh, is this really important? This filmmaking, that essential. Well, we certainly discovered last year during the pandemic how essential movies really are and how they are important in our lives. But this way of telling people's lives in such a simple way, because everybody's got a story. I'm sure, everybody's gone through different experiences, but you've highlighted, um, you know, pretty amazing people. And I really, the one that really just touched me so much is the one that's called The Light. And I'd like to have you tell our listeners a little bit about what that movie's all about. Because I thought her story was just amazing.
Yeah, Jasmine's story is incredible. It could not have been a better fit for Still I Rise, really. Her story came from a colleague of mine who I have a lot of respect for, Bob Nicholsberg, who's a photojournalist. And he and I have stayed in touch for many, many years. We've been colleagues. We've worked together in the field because before my life as a filmmaker, I was a photojournalist. And when I started Still I Rise, he reached out and he said, I've been doing this project in the United States on women who had been trafficked and women who are now speaking about that experience and doing a lot of outreach to help others in similar situations where often they're trafficked by a boyfriend and the boyfriend becomes the pimp and then they're transported from state to state, often working in massage parlors and places that are so obvious, right? They're so, in the middle of a downtown district, people are going on with their lives and it's happening right in front of them, but they don't know how to identify that someone is actually forced into something, forced into prostitution. So Bob asked me, I've been documenting this story through photographs of this woman, Jasmine, for the last 3 years. Would you be interested in talking to her? And I said, absolutely. I think, she sounds remarkable. She had written a book about what had happened while she was trafficked by her pimp, who was also her boyfriend. And the different horrible things that she endured, and that also led to drug addiction, and just how a woman's spirit can be truly torn apart piece by piece, and how difficult it is to put those pieces back together. What's remarkable about Jasmine is that she eventually got, sober and clean. She got her degree. She finished college. She married someone who was very, gentle with her and kind to her, and she had children, and kind of became the suburban mom, driving in her minivan, going to the supermarket, doing the day-to-day tasks that many suburban moms do. And no one really knew her other life before she, before she had children and a husband and a nice house. And so a lot of women would just keep quiet and they would say, look, I made it. I'm good now. I don't need to help anyone else. I got lucky. I've survived this. She had numerous overdoses and, managed to come out alive. And she felt very, blessed and lucky and fortunate. But she didn't stay quiet. She started an organization to help other women, and she started speaking and writing and creating this what she calls bags of hope, where they will package thousands of, and you see that in the film, thousands of bags full of supplies that women on the streets need, and no one really thinks about the things that women need because they're invisible. They're there, but they're not really there when it comes to the way people treat them, society treats them. So what's lovely is that Jasmine would drive around and she would do her daily motherly tasks, and along the way she will come across a woman who is on the street on a corner, and she would pull over and give her a bag of hope and an encouraging note and a hug and say, look, I've been there, I've been where you are, and just know that you're not alone. And sometimes that act of kindness, that small act of kindness can really make a huge difference. And she knows that because she was at that place, and she tells that story in the film. The film is very simple if you think about it. It's just Jasmine sitting down, telling you, we didn't want to use any photographs from that period of her boyfriend, and we wanted to actually use art. So I had a remarkable illustrator who works with us at Still I Rise illustrate her past and the things that she went through. And I think through art we have such a better way to use our imagination as we hear her words about what it must have felt like to be in that position.
It's just amazing when you hear her story and what she went through, and then to come out of it, to have somehow to have that inner strength to. It just seems to me sometimes when you hear these stories, you go, "Oh my goodness, how can they even dig themselves out and become functioning in society again?" And obviously, she did. I was curious whether she was still married or not, because you never showed the husband at all of
Yeah,
it.
sometimes husbands are camera shy. I don't think he was at work, and I don't think he wanted to be
A part of the story,
a
and that's
part of.
understandable. It didn't, you didn't need it, but there was never any mention of a husband, so you're kind of
Yeah,
like, okay, now how did you have those children?
yeah, no, she's still married. Yeah,
That's
and
good to hear.
when I spoke with her, when we did the interview, and I asked her those questions, some of which are very painful to relive. At the end of it, I said, Jasmine, I'm thinking of a title for this, and I want to spend some time really thinking about it because the title of the film should represent the story. And a few weeks later, I thought of it. I thought the light, she is the light, it's just, and I asked her, how do you feel about this? And she said, I think that's how I feel on a daily basis when when I'm helping people. So I think with Still I Rise, it's not just enough to share those stories, but also to figure out what people do with them. What do people do with the difficulties, the trauma, the suffering that they have endured? How are they trying to make it better for others, right? That full circle is very important to me. That I think often as filmmakers, we tell these stories that are complex and difficult, and then we leave our audience kind of frustrated, because the audience feels, especially in the documentary tradition, because often documentaries are about social justice, about change. We're making films because we want to change conditions, we want to change things, and that's our weapon. That's what we have as visual storytellers. And so when you have an audience that says, okay, now I know all these things that happen to people, but what can I do? I thought this is a lovely way to find individuals who have been through all of this, but also have figured out a solution and are doing their part. And it could be small, it's the daily small acts of kindness, right? They're not, they're not winning awards. They're not on television telling you, they don't have time to really um, promote what they're doing. And that's not who they are. And that's why the emphasis is on ordinary people. That's who we want. We want ordinary people who don't have time to think about being famous or having someone congratulate them for the work they do. They do it because that's their calling, because they understand what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. And they feel that their purpose is to help others. And I think by having films like that, you mentioned earlier that you felt inspired after watching them. That's the whole idea, that we have so many negative messages, right? So much that you feel, you watch something and then you feel bad because you can't change it, or because you don't know how to change it. And here is a roadmap of, here is someone who has suffered, who has been through something that very few of us have gone through. And here is how she has figured out a way to not be in the shadows, not live a life of silence, but actually reach out and help others in the same predicament.
I think that's why, how do I say this? Certain people go through things like she did. And somehow, some way, there's something inside. There's that little kernel of hope or a light. Let's say light, because we all are light beings. Say that light, and that somehow, some way, she was able to work her way through that. And I think that's what it's all about, is being able to help others. And as you said, it's like alcoholics who, then they go through and they get sober, and then they decide to, become a sponsor and help other people through that process, because that's, they're all difficult. These, addictions of any sort are difficult. But I think, because when you're helping others, you really, obviously, we're always helping ourselves in that moment too, when we're doing that. Well, one of the things, so I think it's just so important that she discovered, because she didn't right away, right? She didn't start to do anything right away. So, and that something, again, that little spark, that I'm going to help people with this. I mean, it's such a, it's magnificent what she's doing, and I just applaud her. I really, that story, as I said, hit me, really deeply, and I love what she's doing. It's, the other thing is awareness, as we watch these films too, to not ignore these people when we see them on the street. I try, I know myself, I mean, I can say, but when I find a homeless person, I carry cash in, my car. I don't carry cash any other time, but I always have that so I can hand it to someone. But I always want to acknowledge them, and if I can't, because I have to drive, I always say, God bless you as I'm driving away, and I think what we do in society, we just put blinders on and we don't pay attention, and we don't want to look at the homeless on the street, and we don't want to look at the streetwalkers. We just want to, ignore them. And I think what you're doing with your films in this particular instance, and your others too, is that making us more aware of what we can do too on the other side of it, the small things, that small act of kindness, as you're saying. And that's why what you're doing is just so brilliant.
Well, thank you. I think as a filmmaker and as someone who gets to meet a lot of different people, and gets to be in the life of a lot of different people, because it's not like you're meeting in office spaces. You're going into people's homes, you're spending time with their kids, you're sharing meals, you're eating what they're eating, and you're in so many different situations. You get to, I think as a filmmaker, I'll just speak for myself. I find myself thinking that I am just a block, a corner away from any of that. I'm just a corner away from being on the streets or being in that same situation. I never feel, I think also just because I've met and I've spoken to so many people who it's not that difficult to fall through the cracks. It's not that difficult. And I think anyone who thinks that, no, I'm secure and I'm safe and this can never happen to me and it must be their fault and it must be something that they didn't do right, that's not only a naive and sheltered way to look at life and other people's lives, but it's not a smart way to look at life, because it could be you. It could be you. And
Exactly.
I think if you carry on through life as you interact with people and as you see people with that understanding that, I am just a block away from that at any given moment in my life, this is a possibility, then your sense of compassion and your sense of how different people are played different cards at different times in their lives, it gets heightened, and then it humbles you, it really humbles you. um, that has been my
Your experience of it.
conclusion.
It's interesting because I always have said, "There for the grace of God go I." That I could be there as easily as anybody else could be there. And again, this year, more and more people who never had to reach out for help. They never felt food insecure or worried about their housing, and all of a sudden, a whole thousands and thousands of people have been thrown into that situation. So, again, it's like, never think it can't happen to you too. We For you as the filmmaker, how has this changed you sharing these stories and with the world?
It's changed me by giving me, to be honest, it's changed me by giving me hope.
Oh,
I spent
good.
so many, yeah, I've spent so many years. If you look at my own history and you look at the work that I've done before Still I Rise, I spent a lot of years focusing on the evil and horrible things we're capable of as human beings, both as a photojournalist covering places of conflict, places where there is war, um, and a lot of suffering. And then also in my own, where I come from in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, I did a documentary film that took 7 years to make on women who were sold into sex slavery from my region. And so I saw the darkest place. And I think I wanted to, in order for me to be a functional um, and a creative person, in order for me to continue doing work, I felt that I couldn't keep making that type of work after a decade of that. I wanted to shift my focus to something that uplifts the spirit, that you're not shying away from reality, but you also feel, as I mentioned earlier, that there are ways that you can turn things around, that you can turn something really dark into something that can help other people. I think we talk so much about that, of when you survive something, what do you do with that? And finding individuals who not only have survived it, but are figuring out um, ways to, lift others up. That gives me hope. I like to be around people. I like to be, actually, to answer your question, I like to be around the people I film. I really like them as human beings. And it's so wonderful that even after years of making a film, you stay in touch with people and you know what they're up to, what their journey is. And it's wonderful. You just feel like you're growing this, I don't want to say community, but you're growing, your understanding is growing, and they're out there. So you feel like there's a lot of people doing a lot of remarkable things that we just don't hear enough about.
Exactly. And I think all of us need to hear these positive, uplifting stories rather than negative. I think, as I said, during the pandemic, I was saying to somebody, I said, I almost, during the pandemic, I couldn't watch any of these depressing movies. I had to, I was like going to, romantic comedies all the time just because I didn't want to watch anything that was negative anymore. And of course, with what I do, I watch a lot of films, obviously, and a lot of documentaries and a lot of independent film. But I always like it when the film gives you some hope at the end of it, after you watch a documentary and they tell you all the things that are wrong and you go, well, how do we solve it now? Now that you've showed us that. So I agree with you. We only have a few seconds, but where can people see the bite-sized films, and where can they go and watch these?
I like that you call them bite-sized films. I like that. I love food that's in bite size.
Me too.
Um,
I'm a grazer.
they can go to stillirisefilms.org and they'll see all of our films. And one objective that we had is to make sure that they're free, to make sure they're accessible. So you don't need to subscribe, you don't need to pay. You just go to the platform, to the site, and enjoy them.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I highly recommend everybody go to stillirise.org and watch these. It's there. You'll be inspired, and yeah, you'll come away feeling good about humanity. Mimi, thank you so much. Such a pleasure having you on the show, and I look forward to seeing more work that you do in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching our work. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very, my pleasure. My pleasure. You're very welcome. If you've missed any of the Jan Price shows all about movies, they're all archived on thejanpriceshow.com and also on the iHeart Podcast Network, Spotify, Google Play, anywhere where you get your podcast. And also you can follow us at The Jan Price Show on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you all for listening.